Hi, my name is Kit Lindemode. I am one of the managers here at Abick Bar, and we are so happy to have had the Polish Historical Society here today, recording all these wonderful stories of people that grew up on the west side, and several people in this neighborhood as well. Abick's has been a part of this neighborhood for 109 years, and it's been a Polish family at the helm that whole time. We are currently under the ownership of the 6th generation of Abick family to own and operate the bar, and that's unheard of as far as I know, in the city, in the bar business, but in any business really. 6 generations, it's not easy to do.
Hi, my name is Dennis Orlowski. I was born in 1944 in Detroit, Michigan. I'm a mural painter. You probably know about my mural for Pope John Paul in Hamtramck. I did the Madonna Czestochowa for his visit in 1987. And recently I did the history of Polish churches and community at St. Colette's. When I visit my father's parents, grandfather and mother, they would always have the radio on. And I always see it was Polish, and I could never understand it. And whenever they would speak Polish, it always sounded like very aggressive and mean, kind of spirited. And it was usually when they don't want the children to know what they're talking about. Now, my uncle would call me Gamua. That was my nickname, which I found out later meant dummy. My mother would always say glizda or ślimak at me, which means, I guess, snail and worm, which I didn't know. And when we started school, because of our accent, we went to speech correction. The TH sound, I played baseball and I would say, I want to play third base. And I would say 1, 2, 3. That TH sound, they would laugh at me in school. Or I would fall down on my butt and I said, I hurt my duppy. And they'd all laugh because of the Polish in that. But I will always remember when we go back to the east side at Sweetest Heart for chicken dinner or something, I had a warm feeling. It felt like home, and it was a different quality of life naturally than the United States, where it's entirely different. And I've always felt that Polish. And as an artist, I like history, and I do feel a warm feeling that could have been put in you when you're very young, when you're a young person.
To start out with, I'd like to say I'm Irish and Polish, but my mother was Polish, and I went to St. Cunegunda, which is a Polish school, Polish Catholic school on West Side Detroit. I was always an altar boy. I had 2 brothers. Me and my brother Don were shorter. Terry was older. He carried the crucifix in procession, and we were on either side. For every event that they had in church, it was Terry, Don, and Jerry. Okay? I used to get in trouble all the time. At the altar boy meeting, Father Wilczewski says, boy, you come and see me after the meeting. So I'd go to his office after the meeting, and he smoked cigars. And you cut your way through the smoke to get to him. And he says, what do you want? And I says, well, Father, I was passing by. I thought I'd stop in and see you. He gave me a candy bar, and I left. He forgot he told me to come there. Then, being Irish and Polish, everyone says, how did you get a name McPhee? That's not Polish. I says, well, it used to be McPheesky. I had it shortened.
My name is Teresa Abick. My maiden name was Shikara. And I was born and raised on Western Avenue, south of Michigan and east of Wyoming, which was a division of Dearborn and Detroit. I was very active in the Polish National Alliance, but I attended St. Stephen's Parochial School and St. Casimir's High School, and was very active in the Polish National Alliance. That they had the Dom Polski on Junction, south of Michigan. We had dance classes, singing classes, and we had, they said inscenizacja. They were little programs, like plays, little plays. We had Powrót and we had Wiejskie Wesele, which was a country wedding. things like that. And then Powrót Królowej Jadwigi z Polski, that was all done at Dom Polski. And in 1991, I retired from state government and went to, ran for office as first vice president of the Polish National Alliance, located in Chicago. I won in California at that time, and I've been reelected every 4 years till I retired 2 years ago. I spent 24 years as vice president, where we helped young people that were members of the Polish National Alliance with scholarship funds. We support or subsidize dance classes, Polish language classes, to name a few. And of course, we had some senior citizen outings going on. I met the Pope face to face 12 times. And one time I asked him to give me a blessing that I could take to the Polish Americans in the United States. And he made a cross on my forehead that, I'll tell you, it brings tears to my eyes of happiness to know a man when he was alive that became a saint. And if anything else happens, that's the cream of the crop for me.
My Polish name is Henryk Pawłowski. To my American friends, I'm Henry Pawlowski. I grew up in this neighborhood where we are now filming. However, I was born in Poland towards the end of the war, and somehow we wound up in it was the Russian sector toward the end of the war, and we were asked, my family was asked whether they wanted to move to the American sector, which we said yes. And from there, my dad had to pick a country to go to, didn't want to go back to Poland, so we wound up in Texas. But when we were in Texas, my mother had a cousin, Joseph Ortel, who had a home in Detroit, Michigan on 5758 Otis. And so after 6 years in Texas, my brothers got us to move up here in Michigan. Now, my recollections of the area, there were some wonderful memories. The block we lived on was a wonderful block with a lot of Polish neighbors and a lot of good retail. We had Leo Zając's grocery store on one corner. We had Edward Chopsky's grocery store on the diagonally opposite corner. We had Polański Bakery across the street, and it was especially good for us young folks. When we were kids, we would sit on the front porches on Otis and play our card games, or we'd play ball, and in the evening we'd tell stories. And when a lot of the women in the neighborhood that worked at Polański's, when they'd get done with their shift, they would be going back home with boxes from the bakery, and a lot of times it was donuts, and they shared us with the kids. And my favorite was chocolate-covered donuts. Across the street from St. Hedwig's Parish and high school was St. Hedwig's Park and Recreation, and I remember going there and ice skating in the wintertime as a kid. And they would put on programs. They would put different programs for kids, entertainment, and I remember participating in one that we had to learn songs for a play. On other times there was, I remember, a contest, and it was a polka contest, and I remember I came in third place with one of the neighbor girls.
I'm Carol Krasastik, and I was born and raised in Detroit. I grew up on Casper and McGraw, and I went to St. Kunigunda Church school. And I remember growing up on the west side. It was wonderful. There were a lot of kids on our block. Most of them went to St. Andrews. What else? There used to be, I remember the bar on the corner, Polka Inn, and I used to have to go there and get my dad out of the bar.
My name is Jerry Shilagowski. I didn't grow up on the west side, but as a small boy, I remember many visits to my dad's uncle, who lived in the Warren Southfield area on Ashton. And I remember that he was retired, but during his working life, he worked with the blast furnaces at Ford Motor Company. I remember he had, in his house, he had a very old clock, and it was an old regulator clock with a pendulum. And I remember him telling me that when he bought that clock many, many years ago, when he first came to the country, that he paid $5 for it. And although it didn't seem like a lot of money, $5, he told me that that was almost a whole day's pay way back during those times.
My name is Lorraine McPhee. My maiden name was Jamula or Yamua in Polish, as we pronounced it. My grandparents came from Poland, I'm not sure where. And when my Busha, Dad's mom, was pregnant with her 7th child, her husband passed away. I never knew that grandpa, naturally. My dad was only 7 years old. But eventually, Grandma remarried, and they built a home on Waldo and Freer. And that's where my dad was raised since he was 7 years old. Those grandparents opened up a candy store in the basement of their home. And when I was a young girl, I would wait on people coming in. It was close to Edward Street. And I remember going down Edward with my dad many times, and he would always stop and wave to somebody, while he found out later that those were the parents of Bishop Reese, who is now a bishop in Detroit. And I also graduated with Bishop Reese from St. Andrew High School. I was 17 years old, graduating, and I had considered going into the convent. And I changed my mind because I met a gentleman who became my husband later. And the priest called me to the rectory and said, "Lorraine, I understand you're not going in the convent." And I says, "That's right." And they said, "Well," he told me, "we would like you to be our kindergarten teacher as long as you go to night school for your degree." So I agreed. And that year, in September of '58, I began teaching at St. Andrew's School. And my kindergarten student, one of the members, was Father Gary Mihalik. He was just a little boy, 5 years old.
I'm Marie Stankiewicz, and my husband, who is deceased, is Stanley Stankiewicz Jr. We opened our first business on McGraw called Stan's Whip and Whirl, which we knew nothing about the ice cream business. And we opened it, and we had a fabulous business. We had a lot of people in that neighborhood that really enjoyed us, and we enjoyed them because it was just wonderful. We always had something for the children, and they might remember that. Some of them still say, "I remember I won that big stuffed animal," and I never forgot that. We must have had about 100 stuffed animals hanging from the ceiling, and we had a raffle on Sunday night, all on McGraw, and the police were there to protect, the children. And my husband kept calling the numbers. We'll never forget that. He got hoarse the next day. And the children got that every year. And every 4th of July or holiday, we dressed for that particular holiday, gave balloons, free ice cream, and that's the way it is. Things aren't like that now, unfortunately, but that's the things we remember a long time ago. So I just want to say thank you so much for all the people and the children and just everybody. It makes my heart feel good.
My name's Tony Pacula. I was born at 5420 Springwells in 1928 in the front bedroom, and was brought into the world with Dr. Stockfish, who had an office on Larkin Street above the Transic Pharmacy, which was right across the street to Knights of Columbus Hall. Michigan Avenue in the old days was like a mall. From Wyoming on to jump past the Junction area, you could attend movies, you could go shopping, grocery, jewelry stores, hardware stores, boot repair stores. We even had a Chinese laundry on Michigan Avenue that we used to take our white shirts to be starched at the cuffs and collars. I attended the movies at these following theaters: Greystone Theater at Michigan and Casper Street, the Chopin Street Theater between Tarnow and Chopin, in which I watched Frankenstein and Dracula on the same day. So we had a lot of good laughs in our lifetime going to school during big, heavy snowstorms. Schools never closed. We just kept going to school whether it rained, snow, or whether we had sunshine. We went to school every day. They didn't cancel classes like they do nowadays.
Hi, my name is Lorraine Bar Kush. I grew up in the west side of Detroit. Mom and Dad had a store, Bar's Market. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs and also 3 bathrooms upstairs, and we all lived there, my 4 brothers and I. I remember my dad making kielbasa. He brought the recipe from Poland, and he made a mint of money on that. And to this day now, my niece, who lives in Wisconsin, is following my dad's recipe, and she is servicing restaurants and grocery stores in Wisconsin.
Hello there, I'm Barbara Greason. I was a Nowinski at one time. I lived up on Central, 52nd, Ewers, all through there. Now I'm on Parkwood. I've lived there for 78 years. I went to St. Stephen's, and I went to St. Peter and Paul, and I'm back in the neighborhood again. We used to have a Plotsky band. There was this horse and carriage. They used to come up and down Central, and he would yell, "Plotsky, Plotsky." And we'd run out there, and he'd make us these waffles with the powdered sugar on them. Oh, they were so good. That, and then we used to have the Iceman. You'd put a sign in a window, and it would write, it'll be ice, and the Iceman would stop in front of your house and bring this big hunk of ice and put it in your ice box to keep all your food cold. That, and then we used to have a sheeny man. They used to come through the alley and pick up rags and old pots or anything you wanted to get rid of. We used to have a lot of fun when we were small anyway.
I am Lori Gamolka Palazzolo, and I didn't actually grow up in this neighborhood. I was born on Braille Street, which is in the Brightmoor district of Detroit. That is at Evergreen and Joy Road. But my father's mother, Anna Gamolka, lived at 3663 Clippert Street. And if you took a stone and threw it about 2.5 or 3 blocks from here, you could hit her house. My grandfather was very, very sick. So he couldn't work. And of course, there was no compensation. So they came from Latrobe to Detroit to find work that my grandfather could do. By then, they had 7 children, and my father was one of them. They settled in this area around this bar where we're sitting, around Abick's Bar. They found homes that they could rent on Clayton Street, on Martin Street, and on Tarnow Street. And these were homes that rented for very cheap at the time. Whenever they learned of rent that was a nickel cheaper on another street, they packed up and they moved. But the family had a beautiful life. Despite all the struggles and the hardship, what stands out in my mind are the stories that I heard from my aunts and my uncles about how very close they were, and the beautiful memories I have of being in that backyard on Clippert Street and in that house, my grandmother's house. My grandmother was the most beautiful lady. You could see how hard she worked just by looking at her. When we were little children, we spent every Sunday at her house in this neighborhood. We'd go to George's Coney Island on Michigan Avenue after church. We'd come back into the neighborhood and we'd go to Grandma's house. We'd spend holidays there. And I remember the picnics in the backyard and my Uncle Tom playing accordion. He was my dad's oldest brother. My dad and my Uncle Wally were trumpet players, so there was always music filling the house and filling the yard. Music all the time, everywhere. And there were weddings and there were anniversary parties and there were dances every single weekend. From Wednesday night through Saturday night, there were dances going on in this neighborhood. There was a hall, a bar on every single corner. There were storefronts that would be converted, turned into halls and bars because the people in this neighborhood were so close. It wasn't all easy. My mother told stories about living in the house on Clippert Street after she married my father. All the boys brought their wives into the house after they married. And you can imagine a household of that many men with their wives in one house with the mother-in-law, and they all married women who were not Polish. So it was hard. And there were no doors on any of the bedrooms, just curtains. There was no privacy. It's a different life. It's very different, but we love to keep those memories alive. We look back, I look back with nostalgia. I look back and it seems like a romantic time. I know it was hard and there were struggles, but what we try and recreate today is that same warmth and that camaraderie that existed then. And we wish we could see that in people today and the way people looked out for one another.
Hi, I'm Marilyn McKee Meshach. I'm from the area. As a matter of fact, I still live here. I still live on Martin. I was born in the house that I live in, so I've always stayed in the neighborhood. I can remember, let's see, growing up, I could remember the show. We used to have Senate show. We had Senate Sweet Shop, and then we had Better Made Potato Chips, which was right next door to the Senate show. And then I can remember George's Coney Island growing up, and at that time there were no waitresses. They were all little elderly men dressed, they were all dressed in white, so there were no waitresses at that time, so that was pretty neat. Let's see, I could remember when the fruit man would come and he would go toot toot, toot toot, for my mom to come out and get vegetables. I remember having the milk delivered to the house at that time, and let's see. Then I could just remember when I was little, when I was going to Logan School and graduating and then going to Chatsey High School and then getting married. And I was going to move out of the neighborhood. My mom says, no, why don't you just stay here? You can live in the front for nothing. So that's what I did. I stayed. And then I would say to my mom, Mom, it's time for us to maybe move. And she'll say, well, you don't have to pay rent. So we stayed. And then we stayed. Then my kids went to Catholic school. And then before you know it, they're graduating. And I'm still on Martin with my mom. And then my mom passes away and I still stayed. And I'm proud to say that I am in Detroit. And I'm proud to say I'm from this neighborhood. I'm proud that I'm Polish, and I'm just glad to be here.
Anyway, I'm glad I'm Polish, sto lat.
Life is good, and I want to wish everybody God bless. I loved you all.